To Pin the Wings of the Butterfly by Suhayl Saadi. Does the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil set off a tornado in Texas? Edward Lorenz, at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, 1972. On the 25th of August, 2012, a precious butterfly left the solar system. Launched from Earth in 1977 and carrying a gold disk of information about the planet, Voyager 1 was the first human-made object to exit the realm of Phoebus. The change is not abrupt. There is no bump, bell, or passport control. Nonetheless, there is a specific point in space-time when the speed of cosmic particles being propelled outward by the solar wind exactly matches that of those dense, tiny remnants of other stars being driven inward, where the sun's power is matched by the force of the great beyond. And that heliopause is the official boundary. It would not be accurate, though, to describe the areas on each side of the line as two worlds. The same laws of physics apply regardless. For this reason, everything from galactic clusters to deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA, assumes similar patterns. We imagine ourselves as integral beings by reference to that which we define as not us. Yet, we are enmeshed in a constant process of creation and recreation by the external environment of which our biological community, shaped by physical climate or biome, for example, is a part. Each cell, every intracellular organelle, is bound by a porous membrane. This idea of continuum and shifting fields applies ubiquitously, right down to the subatomic realm, where mass and energy, particle and wave come to seem interchangeable. There are multiple worlds in which the tendency to disorder, entropy, is emblematic of perpetual change. Take the genotype and the phenotype, the DNA sequence and its incarnation as macroscopic organism. Some genes might be switched on, others lie dormant, only to emerge in a future generation, triggered possibly by environmental factors. In recent years, genetic testing has become a fad. You scrape your cheek, pop it in the post, and hey presto, you discover who you are. People seek common ancestry with those in far-flung places. Some believe this entitles them to lay claim. Yet human populations are diverse everywhere, and these test results can be misleading. Not all Vikings grow horns. Perhaps nothing exemplifies the complexity, contingency, and precarity of our existence better than the fact that in the year 2020 we found ourselves in the midst of a pandemic. We are having to engage in novel activities like shielding, social isolation, furlough, and lockdown, and to don PPE to protect ourselves from the viral load, niche terms, neologisms, and acronyms which have been thrust into the vernacular. The term to spread virally has assumed a whole different connotation. The techie metaphor has been junked as we face the brute reality. The organism invades our cells, takes them over, repurposes them for malevolent ends. The devilish acronym COVID-19 brings to mind simultaneous images of the King of Crows and a deluxe vacuum cleaner. Yet the virus is a zombie. It has no will, no consciousness. It is not even truly alive. It sits in the limen, the sensory threshold between the animate and the inanimate. Yet every day, from the butterfly tsunami of the troposphere, trillions of viruses from all over the planet rain down upon us. They are legion in our bodies. In each cell we carry inactive material from those which infected our distant forebears, and some theorize that giant viruses emerging from asteroids, comets, or volcanoes in a Beethoven concerto of thunder and lightning may have been responsible for the initiation and development of life on Earth. We all are Frankenstein's children. I am with William Carlos Williams. He was a pediatrician and general physician in New Jersey, and also was a major figure in 20th century English literature. He was primarily a poet, but in his non-fiction prose, such as the Doctor stories, at a time just a few decades ago when infectious diseases ran unchecked through human populations, he told it like it was. He laid it out surgically. Unlike many of his literary contemporaries, he did not, could not, exist in an ivory tower. Not once he had heard the sound of a diphtheritic membrane closing off a girl's throat. The great leaps forward that were the invention of writing, and, much later, those of the printing press, camera, and wax cylinder, might have led to a diminution in the capacity for shamanic memory, but they have resulted in the transformation of human society and comprehension. On one level, technology has been vociferous in its divisive impact on our societies. On another, it has caused a transfiguration in our conception of both ourselves and that which we perceive as other, but from which we are formed and into which we are recycled. For example, the technology that underpins the global economy helped spread the current pandemic, yet technology also enabled the rapid definition of the genetic material, the genome, of SARS-CoV-2 and the unprecedented lightning speed initiation of multiple vaccine trials across the world. Simultaneously, the tired truism that everything is connected presupposes the corollary of singularity. Every hydrogen atom, every thought, every moment of time disconnected. With respect to our place as individuals in communities, to state the obvious, there are more than two sides to every coin, or rather, human beings are not hard currency. The politically engineered construction of nativist clerical fascism into the 21st century is a prime example. Like the Cold War, this follow-on clash of civilizations, with its houses of the damned and the saved, with God reduced to estate agent, asserts spectacular boundaries in blood and fire. It denies and abjures the discomforting innateness of hybridity, and it represents a retreat from scientific understanding, from the cleansing wind of uncertainty and contingency. It is an industrial process or sausage factory that churns out identical marionettes. Yet it cannot evade its own internal contradictions, the fact that it straddles many worlds. In attempting to solder digital technology to a dark age brain and arbitrarily to freeze analysis and exegesis, this cult constitutes itself as modernism's antithesis, yet itself has been generated by the psychosocial crisis triggered by modernism. The resulting cyborg is unstable and cannot last. Dualism is a theological and philosophical concept which runs through many belief systems: light and dark, yin and yang, flesh and soul, sound and silence, the dialectical method, absolute and subjective truths. There are exceptions, but most butterflies' wings are symmetrical. Each wing arises from the same genetic code. In a Zen symphony, when they clap, both pure and complex tones can be produced. Yet they are no more identical than the right and left sides of a human being, or, in an idea first mooted in the 1950s but recently demonstrated in detail by scientists at CERN, the world of charmed quarks. This elementary asymmetry may be the reason the universe exists, since matter and antimatter did not fully cancel each other out in the Big Bang. Might it be that what is known as paranormal activity is, if it exists at all, outside of strung-out hypnopompic human psychology and neurology, an intrusion from one reality into another through some form of cosmic asymmetry? Why, then, does the intrusion seem to move in only one direction? Why are we always the ones to be violated? passive recipients of whatever is out there or in here or around the next loop of the winding staircase. Why can I not travel to this other reality, to possess the beings of that dimension, to freak them out and drive them mad? Why can I not have the satisfaction of being exorcised by a sweating priest clutching a black, leather bound volume and a stick of wax? Some days, would it not be wonderful to be a demon, to set loose all that pent up rage, to let it rip through the fabric of space time? The realms of science and superstition seem irreconcilable, and yet, outside of fraudulent activity, mass hallucination, the power of suggestion, or carbon monoxide poisoning, there still are occurrences which have not been satisfactorily explained, objects flying around rooms, dogs and eyeglasses levitating, cabinet doors closing and opening. There is a theory, backed by some experimental laboratory evidence, that quantum entanglement, in which, if you observe a particle in one place, another particle elsewhere will instantly change its properties, may be involved in poltergeist activity. No wonder Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. The idea, key to quantum mechanics, is that one batch of particles cannot be described without reference to another, even if separated by vast distances. It has long been proposed that noisy ghost phenomena may be manifestations of emotional displacement activity, that instead of unresolved tensions and dilemmas triggering psychosomatic illness, they are unconsciously projected outwards. This, the hypothesis runs, is why such happenings tend to be commoner, and such occurrences are not at all uncommon, in houses with those inherently paranormal beings, children and teenagers. It gives new meaning to the old wives' adjuration, better out than in. At its best, when deployed by skeptics whose aim is to test and disprove the hypothesis, paranormal investigation is the attempt to apply the scientific method to the human experience and not just to flash around some snazzy instruments. Quantum mechanics itself suggests multiple worlds, yet this is not the only example of the world of science contributing to changes in understanding of the ethereal sphere. Modernism arose partly from the political and economic revolutions that occurred from the late 18th century onwards, and partly in response to the invention of photography and tinfoil phonograph recording, and then, later, from the birth of modern physics through the relativist and quantum revolutions and the bloody churn of the First World War. The development of dissonance, the dissolution of the static image, experimentation with form, and a loosening of the seams of architecture and language, the modernist project threw everything into question. It is a cliche to state that rock and jazz musics are hybrids, African forms modulated by various other styles, Middle Eastern, South Asian, Gregorian, Celtic, and crucially by the genocidal experience of Atlantic slavery. Yet it is salutary to learn that just as the brightest stars in the heavens have Arabic names, so too most of the instruments of the Western classical orchestra derive from Arabic predecessors. It is akin to the realization that Buddhism was spread from India to the Far East and Sri Lanka by Greek monks. There must be a koan, a Zen thought puzzle for this. But the fact that these realizations represent moments of illumination rather than simply being widely known facts, like the fact of the apple falling, stems from the artificially created idea of first, second, and third worlds as a basis and justification for white Western supremacy. The separate sections for each piece in this Between Worlds edition, the limen between the words and the reader, the spaces between my words, and the gaps between the written ink or recording and the meaning, the trees from which my paper came, the fuel that generates the energy which allows there to be ink, paper, and digital recording in the first place, both organism and organization require multiple worlds. The concept of two worlds, far less a third, is unfashionable nowadays, isn't it? There is much talk about one world, a phrase which brings to mind either happy clappy people sitting in a utopian circle serenaded by a swarm of white butterflies, or else planetary destruction. In fact, this one world consists of multiple overlapping fields of possibility. Once, my home was underwater. I do not mean it was flooded due to global warming and a lack of investment in regular river drainage. One might say that the whole world resembled Scotland. It never stopped raining, so that the entire planetary surface was sea, and over eons the oceans flowed back and forth, enveloping sometimes one continent, then another. My house is built of blonde Scottish sandstone. In other words, I have a home built not on, but of sand. You scrape it, you get California beach. If one were a butterfly, one could abseil the walls and sunbathe at the same time. I sometimes wonder why the paranormal net curtain does not occasionally blow sideways, revealing a giant plesiosaur in my sitting room. I have always been fascinated by reclaimed land, by nether lands. Underwater ruins, on the other hand, evoke only sadness. It is the Ozymandias effect, the washing away of all our sand castles when it is time to go home. The shoreline is not a constant, it is mediated by tides, governed by the moon, which are both actually responsible for life on land. I once met a lungfish. It was a truly bizarre sight. Its head and shoulders, if you can imagine a fish with shoulders, were out of the water, and it was shooting along the surface in the vertical position, half in, half out. The thing seemed perfectly comfortable in two worlds. In this respect, it is far more evolved than religious fundamentalists, and so it should be. It is our great, great granddad. On good days, one can feel the inner fish. That is the world of inner space, the biome in which we live. What about the world of outer space? I think it misguided when, because of budgetary pressures, governments curtail funding for space exploration. Such pioneering endeavor is in itself worthy and necessary, and ought not to be mutually exclusive with addressing the problems on Earth. It is imperative that we continue to think deep into the black sky. At the risk of alienating at least half of my audience in a peculiarly puerile dualism, I admit that I am a Trekkie. Okay, Star Trek flowed from the pen of Gene Roddenberry, a grunt, cop, and establishment speechwriter, and is about attempting to preserve and perfect the system. But it is optimistic, it is modernist, it contains distinctive historical materialist dialectical elements, and it attempts to proceed along scientific lines. The fantasy Star Wars, on the other hand, emerged from the counterculture, with the idea that all systems are corrupt and must be destroyed. I do not subscribe to this as a modus operandi, or to the eternally dualistic and cynical worldview of the cosmos as presented in the franchise. I do not believe in creative destruction or absolute evil as linchpins of political philosophy. Furthermore, if I wanted to meet an elf and contend with the Lord of Darkness, I'd go to the mythic past of Middle Earth, not the projected future of space opera. I see not two, but countless worlds, an endless panopticon in which we are less than insignificant. This realization ought to impart profound humility, yet what it seems to have done instead is to set in train a chaotic hedonism and the replacement of God with the ego. This, surely, is what is being reified by the vacuous imbeciles whom, increasingly, it seems, we prefer to elevate to positions of high office. Do we not realize that in the long future we all will be returned to the stars? Massive furnaces will split our atoms and we will again become pure energy. The universe will expand, then contract, then expand again, and on and on. Everything constantly is in a state of flux. Reality is never a fixed point. If we cannot map and divide reality, how can we posit one or even two worlds? We are beings in and of multiple overlapping worlds. It cannot be laid out in gold leaf on a diptych. Although the binary lens, this idea of two worlds, can be used to focus on one specific opposition or symbiosis at a particular juncture, it is at best a necessary construct, a tool merely, which can be used to understand one small aspect. No sooner is it imagined than, like the grains of sand which comprise my dwelling place, it dissolves to reveal other more complex sequences. There can never be a vision of the whole. We must resist forces that corral, oversimplify, distort. We must not pin the wings of the butterfly.